But I guess the main takeaways that I'm trying to go for would be U.S. Senator Kelly Loeffler finally conceded her Senate race to Raphael Warnock. And Warnock was someone who WNBA players and NBA players greatly supported. And I guess I wanted us to discuss if this is going to set the precedent. And it's not as if Loeffler is like really into the day-to-day operations for the Atlanta Dream, but the fact that this was kind of brought up to the public knowledge about certain WNBA players and their political ideologies being completely different with the team owners. If this is going to be like a new trend of, I guess, weeding out management that they'd want to be willing to play for, and I guess another conversation about this whole player empowerment era. And if this is going to get to a point where you don't agree with our beliefs, we're not going to play for a team owner like this. And I don't know, what if these team owners just end up getting booted out because of their political ideologies? And like, I understand, especially with this, how the Republicans have been. And I think this is just like a really extreme case of how the Republican Party could be. And maybe this is just an extreme era right now, and everything just has to boil down to being more not as bipartisan. But personally, I don't know if this is like a prediction, but I think this is something that we'll start to kind of continue to see more and more as a trend.
I feel like that's something that's already been kind of happening. When you look at how guys haven't been wanting to go play for the Knicks, it's because he's a dumbass. And like in some cases, it might be because owners are kind of racist. And I think we've heard former players, I want to say from Phoenix, like they've said, Robert Sarver kind of rubbed them the wrong way and they didn't really want to be there, which is part of why they left. So I feel like that's something that's already been happening. Um, but it's interesting because now you can kind of track, and I think people are more aware of like who's supporting which campaign and whatnot. So if like that is an interesting aspect in this, like this to me though isn't even politics. It's more like human rights, you know, like are you racist? Like that's the only thing that would make a player not want to go play for that particular owner, because in terms of just different viewpoints or like the way Republicans see policy, like I don't think that's something that'll really like drive players away. But I mean, if you're a racist and you're racist, they're not gonna want to go play for you.
Yeah, it could also just be me being disillusioned with, okay, so the far right, they stormed the Capitol, and then into a lot of people's heads, like, this is who the Republicans are. But it's like,
Yeah.
not necessarily. This is just a really extreme case of, I guess, who they could be.
Those are like
And
white supremacists. I don't even like correlate that really to Republicans. Like some Republicans are white supremacists, but like you can't just assume like all of them are and like this is what Republicans are, you know? Like it's more nuanced, obviously.
right. I guess I'm also just afraid that people, and I guess players specifically, they won't always understand that nuance, because even if they were Republican and they're only Republican fiscally or economically or whatever, and who's to say there's not going to be some whistleblower in the NBA? You know, they might not know just how politics necessarily work. Not saying that I um, understand it better than they would, but I'm just afraid for people to be like, "Oh, you're a Republican owner? Nah, man, I'm not going to play for you anymore." But I think what you're saying is more likely to happen too.
What's interesting though is like I think it was the Orlando owner Betsy DeVos was like serving as something in education for Trump. And like none of the players really spoke out about it, which is kind of crazy because she was like in the administration or like helping with the administration and no one really said anything about it. Like podcasters would talk about it, journalists would talk about it, but no one from that organization in terms of players really spoke up about it. um but yeah, that's kind of that's pretty crazy to me. I'm surprised no one's talked about it. I think today actually she just resigned like recently, which is kind of surprising, but with everything going on she's probably just trying to get out of there.
Probably. And I guess a more balanced future would be, even if you were to be a Republican and we get a Republican president later on, that we've already experienced the worst and most, I guess, bipartisan political setting that we have. So maybe it really won't be to the point where it's like, oh, okay, you're supporting this Republican campaign and administration now, it won't necessarily be that cancel culture. I think this whole entire like cancel culture and spotlighting all these different types of owners is really going to be an anomaly just because of literally Trump, not
Yeah.
necessarily the Republican Party as a whole. And I guess, I was afraid that it would get to that point, but now that I'm starting to like think about it more, it's like, no, it's just been a weird 4 years.
Yeah,
Uh,
because
yeah.
he's one that promotes divisiveness and like spoke out against other races. Like when the whole Colin Kaepernick thing went down, he was like saying how disrespectful it was to the flag, and then people like storm into the Capitol, and I think he was saying like "Go home with love in your hearts" or something.
Yeah.
So it's just those kind of things where like I said, I don't think that's even really politics, man. It's just human rights.
Maybe just the way this country has been set up is that I'm so conditioned to thinking in bipartisan politics, and it's like, oh, okay, this is your reputation, this is who you support,
Yeah.
and it necessarily has to be that way. One thing I wanted to talk about more, just a little bit, we were talking about this before we started, was from what we saw with what was accomplished with Raphael, or was it with Raphael Warnock, and we see the NBA players and WNBA players really back him up. I think he was polling at 9%, then ends up winning. This also could be the start of something new too, where these are going to be the new voting blocks. Um, Different professional sports teams, different professional sports athletes are going to align and really influence. I don't know if like the fans necessarily, but for them to be more outspoken about their political ideologies, this can definitely this definitely can be the start of something that'll continue to trend.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting too because you look at the NBA and WNBA and you could kind of see exactly which like where they lean on the political spectrum. You could even say that about the NFL. So I mean, this is something we've kind of talked about before where I've always wondered what the demographic is, like what percentage is, Democrat as opposed to Republican watching each, because that is an interesting thing. Like you'd assume, or at least I assume, that most people watching the NBA vote Democrat, and that is kind of like you said, a voters block.